Hello again, this is Kim Alter and welcome back to Design Thinking for Social Innovation. In this lecture, we will discuss the empathize step in the design thinking process, how to identify your target group, and how to understand the wants and needs of your target group. But before we proceed, in order to avoid confusion, I'd like to clarify terminology. So, target group, customer, social customer, client, user, or beneficiaries are all words that can be used interchangeably in videos, lectures, and literature on design thinking. These words refer to the people for whom the solution is being designed. Simply that. So why does the design process start with empathize instead of problem definition, the second step? Well, this goes back to the design thinking adage that you must design with your users and not for your users. Therefore, you must begin by understanding the problems from their perspectives. It's a common assumption to think that we know what a problem is and what the target group needs. However, designing solutions based on assumptions often don't fit the real wants and needs of the target group. So if you start with a generic problem, homelessness, for example, and then you go out and talk to homeless people, your assumption may be that people sleep outside because there are not enough shelters. However, once you start interviewing people, they tell you that no, there are plenty of shelters. They just don't like to go to the shelters because they don't feel safe. They can't bring their pets. Their things get stolen. The shelters are too far away, or the hours are inconvenient. So from their perspective, the problem is one of personal safety and security of their belongings at shelters, the well-being of their pets, and the lack of transportation to get to those shelters. You see my point? So what is empathy anyway? Well, empathy is being able to feel with people. It's being able to understand their perspective and recognize their emotions while staying out of judgment. In the design process, seeing things from people's points of view is a tool for innovation. Getting the perspectives of the people affected by a social problem not only helps you unlock that problem, but it also makes sure that the problem you are trying to solve is the problem that actually needs to be solved. So I once worked with a social entrepreneur, Kathy Freund, who lives in rural Maine, and her daughter was hit by an older driver, and although she was unhurt, Kathy was scared and went on an aggressive campaign to make it harder for older drivers to keep their driver's licenses. She started an advocacy campaign and testified in front of Congress to get what she saw as unsafe drivers off the road. In the process, she heard from the opposing side, older drivers themselves, and learned that they actually didn't want to drive. What? Yeah, they didn't want to drive. They had to drive because there were no other options in rural Maine to get to their doctor's appointments, churches, grocery stores, or to see their friends. Kathy began to meet with older people in the community and found out that not only did they not want to drive, but because they drove only when absolutely necessary, many older people were socially isolated and depressed due to their lack of mobility. About face, this understanding of their perspectives changed everything for Kathy. She went on to create an organization, ITN America, a nonprofit network of more than 700 volunteer drivers who give rides to seniors in rural parts of New England. Let's meet Ann Cotton. She's also a formidable social entrepreneur and founder of CampFed, a girls' education and leadership organization in Zimbabwe. Ann's advice is to listen to the people experiencing the problems and their ideas and crowd out the words of the can't-be-doners. You need to have an open mind and talk to people, but to Ann's point, don't let naysayers subvert your process. So how do you collect information? Well, Paul Polak in his book Out of Poverty tells us that you need to check your expectations and assumptions at the door. You need to go where you can find the problem, to observe people in their surroundings, to talk to people affected by the problem and listen to what they have to say, walk in their shoes, Learn everything you can about the problem's specific context, causes, and perpetuators. I would also add to be clear about your assumptions before you start. You might want to make a list. You'd be surprised how much your own biases about a social problem can get in the way of listening to people who are actually affected by the problem. The best way to do this exercise is to focus on a problem that enables you to get firsthand information from the target group itself. So one hint is that the easiest way to empathize is if the problem affects you. That way you are also part of the target group. So bear in mind that if you select a problem that doesn't impact you, that you're an outsider, and that will impact the environment and the quality of information that you get. Issues of trust and legitimacy can arise. And also, if people think you're coming to help them, they may feed you answers that they think you might want to hear instead of the truth. These are all factors that can complicate data collection and analysis. Reality check those findings when you talk to social entrepreneurs or service providers working with the target group. Ask them what they know and understand about the problem and have them validate your research. We'll get into this more a bit later, but briefly, the empathy map process, you will use 3 different techniques. Immerse in the experience what your target group experiences. Observe the target group behavior in the context of their lives. Engage, interact with the target group through interviews and encounters. And finally, the key to good information is really good interviews. And in an empathy interview is really a conversation. So your empathy field guide from your reading gives you much more details on these techniques and on the interview process itself. But here basically is that you will want to introduce yourself so people know who you are, and introduce your project or what you're doing so they understand. Build a rapport. So this is what we call small talk or icebreakers. Begin to tell them something about yourself and get a little discussion going. Evoke stories. So now you want to dig a bit more deeply and tell some stories and have them share their own stories. And then diving even more deeply is explore emotions within the context of those stories. How are people feeling? How do they feel about this or that? Follow-up questions and statements. And then you want to wrap up and say thank you. And try not to take too much of people's times. So in this process, you want to be human. You want to seek out stories. And you want to talk to people about their feelings. So lastly, in this section, we're going to watch a video on smallholder farmers. This is a video about market segmentation, or how to break up your target group into smaller, more specific types of people. Okay.